Hello, my name is Eric. My side yard has always bugged me, so I'm going to change that into this. This is a lightweight greenhouse roof pergola with 7 tall raised garden beds and a lifted latch gate. The design is my own, and I made it entirely by myself, with no additional help. I'm sure nothing bad happened to me during that process. Alright, I need to talk about my goals for this project, as they determine how I built it and why I built it. This is not a tutorial, but I will go over why I decided to make the project the way I did. The goals. Number 1. I want to make this side yard into something aesthetically pleasing. Number 2. I want whatever I build to last a long time. Number 3. This project must be functional and promote natural life. I want to specifically give lizards a safe haven from the overwhelming amount of cats and birds that live in my area, as lizards are one of nature's greatest pest controls. They are phenomenal at eating both cockroaches and flies, which are 2 insects that I could go all of my remaining life without seeing again. Number 4. I want to reduce weather severity and lower the temperature. It stagnates above 100 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 2 months out of the year here, and it's unbearable to stay outside for long periods of time. Number 5. I want ever-growing or perennial produce that I do not have to work for. Now all I need to do is condense 78 hours of footage into 40 minutes. First off, whoever owned my house previously apparently did everything by himself, while being completely hammered. My neighbors have told me this on several occasions, unsolicited. My first issue is that the concrete ground here has a 3-inch deficit incline starting at the middle of the side yard. Yes, of course the previous owner poured this himself. It's currently covered by fake lawn because of how hideous it is. This, however, does not make the problem disappear. And I do need to make up for the unlevel ground before I start building this project. Before I can get to that, I need to figure out what I'm using to build my raised garden beds. I decided to create this project on as much of a budget as I can think of, and the first thing that came to mind is old fencing. People replace fencing all the time due to rotting or design choices. If you know what to look for, a lot of this fencing is actually reusable. After browsing Facebook Marketplace for a few days, I found a post of a contractor removing a fence. He was taking it to the dumps and giving anyone a chance to come pick it up. So I did that. It took several trips, but I managed to bring home an entire backyard fence. Now I simply have to process all this wood. I used a hammer and a crowbar for the majority of this work and separated all the usable wood from the rotted wood. This took 2 days in full, one to partition the wood and one to remove the unusable wood from my property. What are you doing? Huh? What are you doing? Here's that 3-inch deficit I was talking about. It's now time to remedy this issue. I live in a very dry, hot climate, so my solution to leveling this already concrete ground is probably unlike others. I'm going to use landscaping timbers to form a frame. This will allow me to lay down a zinc mesh underlayment to keep my leveling rocks inside the frame. The reason that I'm using aggregate rock for this is because I want my water from my irrigation to freely run down the bottom of my raised garden beds, thus greatly reducing the chances for my wood to rot. After the rock is laid, I need to stamp the rock into place to ensure it doesn't move from this point on. Once the rock doesn't move when walked on, the leveling pads are ready. Now it's time to process the usable wood into the same lengths. I'll need to trim off the dog ear cuts made to the fence previously. Here's the wood now that it's dimensional lumber. The fence I took apart has both wide and skinny boards, being cedar and redwood respectively. Taking the leveling platforms into account, and my height being 6'6", I'm aiming for the height of these raised beds to be around 32 inches tall, so I don't have to strain my back when working in this area. The length coverage I'm aiming for is about 40 feet, minus the area that my faucet is. To craft these raised garden beds, I'll be using waterproof wood glue, a brad nailer, and screws. Wood glue is an absolutely crazy adhesive. It's even stronger than nails and screws if used properly. The point of the metal fasteners I'm using is simply to make sure the wood glue has proper contact. These boards aren't exactly in good shape, so they need the extra support. I would like to eventually get to the point that I don't use any metal in my woodworking projects, but I'm not quite there yet. Since these boards are warped and twisted, I'll be eyeballing the lengths I need to fasten the sides together. Once the fronts and backs are completed, I need to connect the side paneling in the same process, making sure to glue and fasten into the inner legs. That way, everything is fastened at the same point of contact. Finally, I'll be gluing and fastening some inner boards to prevent the fronts and backs from bowing. The pressure from dirt in a raised garden bed is not like water in an aquarium. You know how there's constant pressure on all sides. Instead, dirt is mostly self-supporting and around 70% of the pressure and weight focuses downwards, letting me get away with making these raised garden beds from super old fencing panels. But using super old fencing panels is exactly why I'm supporting them in the middle, to prevent issues that might occur in the future. Here is the first raised garden bed in position. It's nice and sturdy and doesn't bend in any direction when I move it. Now that I know that the design is solid and I'm happy with the look, here is 6 more raised garden beds. Having them in contact side by side like this helps support the sides that I didn't add structural braces to. Next on the list is putting primer and paint on these garden beds. This more or less waterproofs the wood and ensures they keep a constant integrity throughout their new lives. Like me, the only way these are falling apart is if a major physical trauma occurs. You may be asking yourself, is paint really okay to use on garden beds where I'll be growing my vegetables and fruit? The answer is yes, it can be. It highly depends on what paint you use, which in my case is 100% acrylic for outdoor use. And it depends on what type of barrier you use between your soil line and your wood protectant, which I will cover later in this video. What are you doing? Get out of my shot. Get out of my shot. Said no. Now I need to build the pergola itself, which is the main structure of this project. Pergola will be made using pressure-treated 4x4s, 2x4s, and 2x6s. I'll be using 2 different main joints to stabilize this structure. The first, I believe to be a lazy, full-through, brittle joint. I'll be cutting these joints into my 4x4s, but I need to cut off 1 foot of half of my 4x4s. Why? Because I want my pergola to have a lean. This will shed rain and debris off the top of my structure without my intervention. After all, I am lazy, and I want most of the stuff I build to take care of itself. To cut these joints, I marked out as evenly as I can the width of my 2x6s onto my 4x4s. From that point on, I cut them through with a handsaw, and badly chiseled away at the inner wood, with probably the worst chisels I could have possibly bought. I mean, these things were cheap. The kind of cheap that felt as if the company owed me money just for using them. Well, anyways, here's the horrible cut joints that are perfectly usable. Now it's time for a forced break from this project. Now, you might have noticed there is some sort of structure in some of the clips that isn't there anymore. That's because the previous owner had built his own pergola while drunk, and it weighed over 2,000 pounds. Not only was his structure super top heavy, he didn't use treated or protected wood for the frame, it was just normal pine wood. And the screws he used weren't weatherproof screws. So all the fasteners to the structure rusted into dust, Needless to say, I had to take the structure down as it was starting to lean and I was afraid for my life. Now that I'm done with that massive forced labor intermission, it's time to paint my pergola legs. It will be much harder to paint them once the structure is made, so I'm doing it ahead of time. I'm using a 100% latex outdoor paint for this job. Latex paint has this outstanding property to not crack due to weather, heat, and humidity when applied to expanding and contracting wood. As long as you put several coats on it, that is. I will be using a minimum of 3 coats for all of my applications of paint. As the paint dries on both my legs and my pergola legs, I need to level out the tops of my raised beds. Leaving the beds jagged and uneven won't allow me to add a brace to the top, so I'm going to use an electric planer to remove as much material as necessary to smooth them out. They don't have to be perfect, but they do need to allow wood and glue to sit snugly with full contact. These seem to be level enough for me. Now this is the most exciting part of the project for me, building the pergola. This is going to look really awkward, especially because I'm doing this by myself. But the plan is to drill the pergola legs into the main raised garden bed supports and make sure that they're level. Once I get the first legs up, the rest of the build is much easier. I then have to attach my cross braces with some 90-degree metal brackets. This will help stabilize the legs as I build the rest of the pergola by adding the 10-foot 2x6s to the top through my brittle joints. The cross braces don't look like they're level in this clip, and that's because they're not. They're in place just to help me put up my 2x6s. Once those are fastened, I'll re-level the cross braces. So, I put these on backwards. I took the time to paint these. But I put them on backwards. So now I have to paint them from this side. So that sucks. Now that everything is in place, I'm going to paint and touch up everything to 3 coats of latex. For a beginner woodworker, I'm actually really happy with how snug these joints turned out. The way this is built will negate almost all weather conditions and allow the structure to last as long as I want it to. Remember that pergola that I broke down? Well, the top was made out of ugly tar plastered rubber shingles. But beneath it was perfectly usable thin cedar planks. Even though the structural pine supports to that pergola rotted away, the cedar in the roof looked almost brand new. So I'm going to use that for both the trim and rock partitions because you can't beat free wood. With my cuts made, I can now paint these rock partitions with primer and paint, preserving them for the foreseeable future. You've probably been confused at what I mean by rock partitions. Basically, I'm using structural wood to separate the soil layer of these raised garden beds from my pergola legs. This will greatly increase the lifetime of my pergola. The reason these are called rock partitions is because I'm partitioning a section of these garden beds apart and filling them with rocks. Once filled and compacted, these rocks will support my pergola legs, making it free draining from any water and reducing shake and weathering from outside sources. Additionally, as sun hits these dry rocks, they will heat up, creating little basking spots for the lizards to enjoy safely away from prying eyes. Now comes the only complicated part of this project, at least for me. To properly seat the top of my pergola together into one wooden fixture, I need to make a bird's mouth cut. You will need a speed square and a carpenter square for this job. To figure out the angle at which you need to make this cut, you need to figure out your pitch. The pitch is the difference in height in your project from one side to the other. My pergola's height goes from 8 feet to a 7-foot lean. Since there is a difference of 1 foot, I chose to do a 2 and 12 pitch. To make my cut calculation, I score the spot I want the cut to be at by placing it on top of my pergola. Once I had my marks, I marked through the entire board for clearer visuals. From that point on, I angled my speed square to the number 2, or 10 degrees, which matches my 2 and 12 goal. I mark that angle. I repeat the process on the other side. To get my cut line, I need to mark the diamond on my speed square and make a visual cue. All I have to do after that is line up my carpenter square at the proper angle from diamond mark to my first mark and make that cut mark. It's a good idea to fill or color in the area you want to cut so you don't accidentally cut the wrong piece out. I'm going to cut my mark out with a super old jigsaw that was given to me by my father. It's not a very good jigsaw, but there's something sentimental about using tools my father gave me now that he's passed. It almost feels like he's living on through my work. Let's test the fit. Now that's a snug fit. To make the rest of my rafters, I'll be tracing the line cuts onto my other 2x4s. then just cutting them out. The low ends of my rafters will look a bit too directly bought from the store if I don't do anything. So I'll be making a one-sided dog-ear cut to them. Now they have a nice taper to them and look intentional, like I know what I'm doing, which is debatable. Since all of my rafters are properly notched now, I can figure out the spacing I want the polycarbonate panels to be. I'll ensure the spacing stays accurate by dry fitting my panels on the top rafters, then measuring the distance between the middle. With that measurement, I can cut out support spacers that are all exactly the same length. Painting them ahead of time will help me with the amount of awkward angles that my body will have to contort into. I'll still have to apply 1 to 2 coats of latex paint after the pergola is built, but I'll be happy to do that since that means the project is basically done. Adding the rafters is pretty simple. I just add my 2x4s and squeeze them together against my spacer support. Once in place, I can then drill my supports into the rafters with alternating pocket screws and affix the rafters themselves. For this, I'm using a Forstner bit to drill out a plug from the wood. I then fasten my 2x4s into the 2x6 cross beams using a 3.5-inch weatherproof screw. Once the 2x4 is stable and doesn't move, I glue up a dowel and hammer it into the fresh hole I just made. This will seal the entire hole and protect the screw from both the outdoor weather and help prevent shake and movement within the top of the pergola. This is a very important step because it increases the longevity of this project significantly. Now, I just repeat the process through the entire top of my pergola until it starts looking like a pergola. Look at how sturdy that is. For every row that I'm affixing to the rafters, I'm making sure to line up my polycarbonate panels to dry fit an approximate distance. This helps me to account for any warping in the wood as I fasten it to the top. Now I just have to fasten all the remaining rafters and supports to this project, preferably without injury. Nature. Wow. It's day 480, and I'm still painting. And there's bugs. A lot of bugs. Everything's fine. Hey, I gotta work. You gotta move. Now that everything is painted evenly, it's really starting to look like a pergola.
What is it, Kiba? You like pergolas too? Is this your favorite thing? Is that a yes?
My final touch for the structural integrity is adding diagonal supports. So I'm going to cut out evenly measured pieces of wood and cut each side at a 45-degree angle. Again, painting them ahead of time saves me some future backache, since I'm an old decrepit man. Diagonal supports do a lot to reduce shake to my canopy, and further makes these pieces of wood into one solid project. I am so close to being finished here. To attach my polycarbonate tops, I need to dry fit them into their respective places. Then, I need to pre-drill the plastic where I'm going to be adding them. This prevents the greenhouse roofing from cracking or shattering to the pressure of my screws. Additionally, you can't use normal screws for this. You need to use wide twin wall screws with rubber gaskets. This holds the pressure more evenly from your fastener and keeps your polycarbonate in place through weather and heat expansion. While I'm building the final canopy to my pergola, I'd like to explain why I'm using polycarbonate or greenhouse roofing panels. You see, polycarbonate panels do two specific things I'm looking for in a garden roofing. Number one, with airflow, they can reduce the temperature of hot areas by up to 20 degrees depending on how thick the panels are. For my area, getting over 100 degrees, sometimes above 115 degrees for 2 weeks at a time, removing the high spikes of heat waves benefits the plants I want to grow here and prevents them from going into shock. Number two, polycarbonate panels actually protect you and your plants from most of the harmful UVB and UVA radiations from the sun. This helps the plants and my white pasty ass from sunburning. Additionally, the reason why I painted my pergola bright red and my raised gardens white is because polycarbonate is still plastic. It will expand and contract to the weather, and if you have dark colors in direct contact or near your polycarbonate, you do risk melting it. The difference in temperature between a white rock and a black rock in the same sun conditions can be over 30 degrees, so keep that in mind. The pergola itself is structurally finished. Now I can attend to finishing the raised garden beds. I'm sure you've been wondering how I'm going to make this painted surface safe for vegetables and fruit. Well, not only is the paint I use technically non-toxic, but I'll be using a weed fabric to form a breathable barrier between my paint and soil. Pay attention though, this part is extremely important if you're going to do something like this yourself. This weed fabric is not cloth. It's a flexible plastic weed fabric with minute breathing holes. It's one of the cheapest weed fabrics you can buy at a big box store, but it's not cloth. Because it's plastic, it will not absorb water through capillary action and stay wet. This is very important because trapped water against wooden surfaces is the quickest way to rot those wooden surfaces. The fabric you use also needs to have holes, either small or large. If it doesn't have holes, water can still be trapped on the side of the wood from watering or rain, and that can also rot the wood away. I applied this weed fabric very loosely to the lip of my raised garden beds. You don't want this to be tight because when you add your dirt or soil, you can end up ripping it apart, defeating the purpose of it being there in the first place. So, overcut your fabric so it's taller and wider than you think you'd use, and staple it on the top of your garden beds. I'll be covering mine with trim and wood glue to lock it in place. Next, before I make my garden bed trim, I want to fill in my rock partitions. This will be the second to last stabilization technique for the pergola, as the weight of the rocks will keep my pergola legs from moving in any direction, and they will also be free draining from any water source, preventing rot. It's time to build my fences and latch gate. Most of this will be hidden, so I'm just going to use a simple box frame with leftover pressure-treated wood. Then I'm just going to cut the cedar from the pergola I took down as the face boards. I want these to look rougher, so I'm not going to do anything to these boards besides dog-ear cut them. So, here are the fences and gates. I got the spacing about where I want them to be. I do want there to be space in between the boards because I'm trying to facilitate life and like lizards and stuff to feel safe from the birds, because there's a lot of birds here. Yeah, I think that's good. Cool. Now I need to primer and paint these to make them match the rest of the fixture. If you couldn't tell, I've been at this all day. I do not recommend painting at night. With the fences out of the way, I'm going to make the trim. First, I'll plane the front of these uneven raised beds. I won't be able to get them totally flat, but I need to remove any of the parts jutting out too much. Now, I just cut the dimensions that I previously measured for the trim. Here's a tip for fellow woodworkers. If you've worked with cedar in the past, you might have noticed that it doesn't take to sanding very well. That's because cedar wood's fibers are super long and different than most wood you would normally work with. The way you get a nice finish on cedar is actually by planing it. I'll be using a benchtop planer for my boards, but you can use even a hand planer and get similar results. Once it's smooth to the touch, you're done. You don't want to do much else to cedar, otherwise you risk re-splitting its long fibers into unrepairable pieces. This is what my cedar looks like after being resurfaced. Fitting the trim to my pergola legs is an important step to adding structural integrity to my raised garden beds. By fitting them tightly, they will combine my garden beds to my pergola, making it one solid structure instead of multiple. To do this, I roughly eyeballed the measurements of the legs and traced the parts I would be removing onto my cedar planks. When sketching for these measurements, I made sure to sketch slightly less than the material I thought I would need to remove, so the fits would be as snug as possible. With woodworking, it's much harder to add material than take it away, so it's preferable that you remove as little material as possible. As you see here, I accidentally split the cedar plank into 3 pieces. In situations like this, it's better not to panic. This piece of trim will be perfectly usable because woodworking is very forgiving. Wood glue is sort of magical, as in when it's used correctly, it binds wood together stronger and more durable than wood itself. So all I need to do in this situation is glue these pieces back into place and apply pressure. This gives me an excuse to take a break because I'm awful at doing that, and it repairs the injury to the wood that I caused by being inexperienced. No harm, no foul. I wish I could say that this is the last time that I'll be painting this project, but it isn't. 2 coats of primer and 2 coats of acrylic paint will have this trim ready to attach. Before I do that, I'll be cutting away at the weed fabric that isn't held down by staples. This will ensure a nice contact point between wood glue and trim. I cut my trim to be rather wide, and that's actually on purpose. I want to be able to rest larger pots on any sides of my garden beds without the fear of them falling over or the trim breaking. While I'm attaching the trim, I'd like to talk about why my raised garden beds are so tall, at almost 33 inches high. You see, there are more benefits than just making sure that I don't have to bend over while working. 2 benefits, in fact, that are severely overlooked, and can actually prevent disaster even years down the line. Firstly, having a large base of controlled soil will give your plants an incredibly diverse microbiome of bacteria and beneficial fungi. This helps quickly break down fertilizers and other organic materials that your plants desperately need to sustain a healthy life, whether you're growing perennials or annuals. Secondly, water retention and expulsion get a huge upgrade. Water won't be trapped anywhere in your garden bed because of the deep bed of soil that you've created. It simply freely drains. This removes overwatering as an issue and prevents bad weather like raining for, say, a full week straight from drowning your plants. Your soil will still be wet due to capillary action, but it will not keep oxygen from reinvigorating your soil. Additionally, because the lower levels of your bed will be wet, your plants will train their roots to stretch much further. This benefits them highly because with longer roots, it's easier to obtain the nutrients that they need. To attach my floating gate, I'll be clamping them into my garden beds. Once the connection is secure, I'll drill a hole into the inner garden bed legs with a Forstner bit. Then I'll fasten them like I fastened the top of my pergola. By screwing in a 3.5-inch weatherproof screw, then hammering a glued dowel into the hole and sawing it off. To make room for my latch gate, I'll need to sketch it out on the gate itself and chisel away at the material until I have enough room for the mechanism. As I was unfamiliar with this, having never done it before, it took me a little over 5 hours to get it right, but I'm happy with it. I mean, Just look at how fluidly this gate opens and then swings back into locking position. Nice. With that, construction is complete. I, for one, am very glad to be done with this. It wasn't overly complicated work, but it was a lot of work for one person. Here it is 3 months later. I've started to accumulate the perennial plants that I'm going to be growing here, as the reason for this structure is to feed my family. This raised garden bed pergola has experienced winds up to 20 miles per hour, hail the size of dimes, and one heavy rainstorm since I finished building it. It hasn't moved an inch, and I haven't noticed any paint cracking or damage to the polycarbonate. So, all in all, I'm extremely satisfied with the look and the structural integrity of this build. And I've learned a lot, both by researching how to make this and actually building the thing. My total cost to build this entire project came out to $1,295. Minus the leveling structures, i.e. rock and timbers, the total price would be $937, just in case you were thinking of building something like this yourself. I hope you liked this video. I'm planning on making updated videos on this project for irrigation, how to fill the raised beds as cheaply as possible, and what consumable plants I'll be growing here. I also cover more things than woodworking on this channel, like life skills, gardening, easy healthy cooking, and aquarium or pond builds. If any of these topics interest you, consider subscribing. Until next time.